Dear reader, I'm Tony and this is Book Text. Today I'm going to do the For the Love of Classics book tag. But first, our word of the day and our cat appearance of the day. The word of the day is the word blowsy. It's an adjective, and I feel like it's probably more commonly used in the UK than it is in the US, but it often refers to a woman and it means unattractive, not much to look at, maybe not put together. One of the idioms associated with this word is to have a face like the back end of a bus. And of course, it's mostly applied to women because society judges women on their appearance. So blowsy. Maybe don't use the word blowsy to refer to women. Upend the system and use it to refer to a man who is not put together. There you go. So there are 15 questions associated with this tag, and it originated with, it's been around for a while. It originated with Ange at Beyond the Pages and Yamini at The Skeptical Reader, I believe. So I'm going to go through the questions and answer them as best as I can. So question number 1, why do you read classics and how often do you read classics? I had to do a lot of self-reflection to answer this question. Why do you read classics? Because I was trained to read classics in school and I didn't know why I continued to read them after school. And I think I read them because I like that the storylines are pretty crisp and clean. Excuse me. You know, you kind of expect that you're going to be reading maybe smarter stories or more well put together stories than maybe more modern things where the publishing industry is flooded with mediocre books. And not that all classics are above average, but I find that there was a little bit more critical thinking going on in the reading or the writing. I think it's also interesting to read the stories that have informed modern stories. You get a little bit of background, the literary history, the literary past of the things that I'm reading nowadays. That's really interesting to me. Where are you? No, okay. I'm going to put my cat down because he's trying to rub up against the camera tripod and that's not going to work. And I also enjoy stories that explore character deeply. So classics tend to do that a lot more than modern stories. Not all classics are character-based. Some are pretty plot-based, but more often than not, they are character-based. And I appreciate that kind of story more than a plot-based story. As far as how often do I read them, I try to read one classic a month. Sometimes more often, sometimes less often, but I aim for about one classic a month. Question number 2, what is a period/country/culture that you haven't read many classics from and would like to? I am terrible at reading outside of Victorian England. I don't know why that has, I kind of know why the literary canon focuses so much on Victorian England, especially the novel canon, the novel genre. And that was my most interesting genre in school, so I wasn't as interested in poetry or essay or any of the others. So I want to break out of Victorian literature, and some of my main interests are Edwardian literature, which I know is not a far cry from Victorian, but it's a step outside. I'm also interested in BAME literature because something that I haven't read a ton of. I've read some, but not a ton. Canadian literature and Indigenous literature. I actually took a class on Native American literature and found that really interesting. I love the focus on nature and on the kind of native mythos, and so I would love to continue reading in that vein. Question number 3, which modern book do you think will be a classic in 100 years' time? And I was thinking about this, and I don't read a ton of super modern books. I kind of slowly discover books. But one that I discovered several years ago that has stayed with me the way that a classic would stay with me is Ruta Sepetys' Salt to the Sea. This is the story of refugees during World War II who are fleeing to the safety of Germany. And almost always those kinds of stories are about fleeing from Germany. And so this kind of changed the way that I thought about the war and the way that I viewed good and bad, that it's not always black and white like it has been painted, especially for World War II. And so that was really interesting. I thought it dealt with the characters really well. There's tragedy, there's triumph, so I think it could stand the test of time really, really well if we pay attention to it. So, Salt to the Sea, please be a classic in 100 years' time. I also don't know that I hope that I'm around in 100 years' time to see it, but if I am, I hope I can say I foresaw this. Question number 4. What was the last classic you read? I recently finished The Napoleon of Notting Hill by G.K. Chesterton. This book was written in 1904, but set in a futuristic 1984, and was kind of poking fun at positive futurist writers like H.G. Wells, who kind of look at all the kind of technology and advancement that mankind can have in the future, and instead looked at the absurd, unchangeable nature of people. So it ended up, though it was absurd, it ended up making peace with the seriousness of absurdity. And I thought that was kind of an interesting twist. I wasn't expecting that. So more to come about this book in my June reading wrap-up. All right, question number 5. What was the first classic you ever read? This was hard to figure out because I've been exposed to classics in different forms. I loved shows like Sesame Street, Reading Rainbow, where even Arthur or Wishbone. Wishbone was a great introduction to some classics. So it's hard for me to kind of figure out when I read the book versus when I saw something about the book or when I saw the story being portrayed in a movie or a TV show. And also, it was just hard to remember that far back. So I think the first classic I read was Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. I had my horse girl phase in late elementary school, early middle school. So I was about 10, 11, 12, probably when I read this book. And it haunted me, and I haven't read it since because I can't handle that much sadness, especially about animals. So I have treasured the book ever since, but haven't read it again. And I still have the whole bookshelf of my horse girl phase to prove that I went through that phase. But this was the classic on that shelf. Question number 6. Favorite classic book cover? This was another really hard one. Why do you gotta ask hard questions? Golly. So I decided to cheat and do several options for my favorite classic book cover, and all I did was look at my shelves and think, oh, that's pretty, that's pretty. Not that the pictures or the covers haven't stayed with me as long as maybe covers for modern books, but there's a few standouts from my shelves. Then I haven't read any of these books, so that's sad. But I do love a good painting on a book. I know it's sometimes vague or unrelated to the story, so I can't tell if these are related to the stories, but I do appreciate the aesthetic of the cover. And the first one is this copy, the Barnes & Noble edition of Anthony Trollope's Barchester Towers. And I love this kind of, teal-y, turquoisey color. And then it looks a lot more green on the screen. This beautiful, rich, autumny painting. I like that. I enjoy that. And it has the sense of, that kind of provincial town feel to it. So I want to read all of Trollope's works. There are a lot of them, but I will eventually get to this one, and then I will know whether or not that cover actually fits the book. Then I also had this selection of Thomas Hardy novels. They are all in the Oxford World Classics editions. And I think they pretty well represent Hardy's pastoral setting kind of writing. So I have Far From the Madding Crowd that has this literally pastoral. We have a pasture with sheep in it. That I think matches what I know about the book. Thomas Hardy's The Woodlanders. I like the darkness of the woods compared to the brightness of the woman there. Looking forward to that one. Hardy's A Pair of Blue Eyes, which there's not a lot of landscape in this one, but you can kind of see back behind the girl, maybe a stream. There's large enough for some sort of boat, or rowboat maybe, and then some hills in the background. But this, not only that, but the soft portrait of the girl with the blue eyes. It's very pretty. And then Thomas Hardy's The Return of the Native. Very pastoral as well. Love the landscape. We do have a figure. Don't know how she relates to the story. Is she the one mentioned on the back of the book as Eustacia? I don't know. Hope to find out soon, because I also want to read all of Thomas Hardy's books. So those are my options for favorite classic cover. Except I'm now drowning in books on the couch. Okay. Number 7, classic authors you wish had written more books. Easy peasy, Anne Bronte. I read The Tenant of Wildfell Hall in school. I read Agnes Grey more recently, loved both of them, thought they were fascinating, wanted more from her and from her characters. Too soon, still can't get over her death. Number 8, least favorite classic. So this was hard because I don't necessarily hate books per se. So I don't hate the book mentioned here, but it is my least favorite because I will never return to it. And that is, I don't have a copy of it, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I read this book for a theory class in college, and I wrote a paper. I remember being in the library over Thanksgiving weekend, writing this paper about how the glorification of the scapegoat, the kind of important moral decision that one of the characters makes to replace another man, it doesn't actually solve the problem that he's trying to solve. It won't end the revenge cycle. The replacement of a scapegoat and the entrance of a martyr is not going to end the revenge cycle in the book. And I haven't been able to think about that book outside of its moral philosophy ever since. It was a fine book reading it, but in the analysis, I decided that the morals weren't quite there. They weren't quite ready. So that's my least favorite classic. Favorite translated classic is number 9. And when I was researching this one, I came to the horrifying realization that I have not read enough translated classics, maybe a handful of books. I've read some modern books that have been translated from other languages, but not enough classics. I've stuck too closely to Victorian England. So from the few books that were translated classics that I have read, I'm going to have to take the easy way out with Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, read it in high school, so it's been a long time. And I haven't really added, most of the translated books that I read were in high school. So I need to get over that, and I'm hoping to, I've got several on my shelves right now that I'm hoping to get to. I'm going to add those. I'm committing now to add those to my TBR. Question number 10, favorite modern classic, meaning published after 1900. This was another really hard one. Why do they have to be so hard? So, if I have to make a favorite, I would probably go with To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, because it has stayed with me. There's a couple others that I can choose from, but this one I think had the most interesting moral implications for me when I read it growing up, and the story has stayed with me and keeps becoming more and more relevant as time goes on. So this was my favorite modern classic. All right, number 11, classic literary places you would like to visit. Prince Edward Island of L.M. Montgomery fame. It just sounds so lovely, charming, like I could get lost and not actually be afraid. Would love to meet the characters, of course, but if I could just meet the character that is the island, that's fine with me. Number 12, first classic you would recommend for a child. I think an adventure story is a fun place to start for children. And I actually took a page from my sister's book, not literally, but she read this story to her 5-year-old a couple years ago, and he really enjoyed having it read aloud to him. So I'm going with Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. I, again, experienced this book for the first time with Muppet Treasure Island and loved it and read it on my own. I think I listened to an audiobook in the bath. For some reason, that's my memory of it. But great one, lots of fun. Not too overwhelming language, but enough that you can know that it's a classic, that it's not just your average chapter book. So that's my recommendation. Question 13, classics you think are mistitled, and what would you title them? I had to think about this for a long time, and I kept stopping on titles and being like, ooh, I could change that, but then realizing that that's just a really great title for that book, whether it's alliterative or it has a good rhythm to it, or it actually covers the main point or the main character of the book. And so I couldn't change those, but I did read Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens last year for Booktober. So last year? Booktober seems like it was so long ago. Of course, 2020 has taken 3 or 4 years to get through. But Our Mutual Friend, I thought there's so much better ways that themes that you could kind of emphasize in the title. Our Mutual Friend, I understand why it's called that, but I think there's more interesting things that we could focus on. And I might even, from what I remember of the book, I might even just simplify it to something as minimalist as the dust or just dust, because that seemed to play a major role in the dustiness of London, the dust piles that are, hiding the treasure and things. So I might rename Our Mutual Friend to something more interesting. Number 14, your favorite classic you'd recommend to everyone. I remember I'm stashing all my books. North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is the edition that I read in college, graduate school, I think. And so it's not my prettiest or nicest to read, but it is the one that is dear to my heart because it was my first experience with North and South. This is a fun story about fun, as much as a classic about social issues can be. But it is about the differences between Northern England and Southern England in the Victorian era, and one woman trying to fit in Northern England when she is from Southern England. And she's realizing, there's also a lot about industrialization versus, kind of country living. Ooh, I loved all of the juxtapositions, loved the relationships that develop in this story, you know what I mean? And I just recommend this to a lot of people, especially if they have enjoyed Pride and Prejudice in any of its forms. This is a good next step. All right, number 15 is who do you tag? And I don't actually know enough people on BookTube yet to tag anyone. So if you're watching this and you haven't done the For the Love of Classics book tag yet, consider yourself tagged. And remember, there's always another book.